The shriek of a whistle tore through the morning air, but by then it was already too late. At 7:20 a.m. on July 9, 1918, the ground near Dutchman's Curve outside Nashville shook as two troop trains, both running full speed on the same single track, slammed into each other head-on. The impact was like a cannon blast, sending cars of timber and steel splintering into each other. Wooden coaches buckled and shattered. Locomotives reared up in a cloud of steam and smoke before toppling onto their sides. Soldiers, many only weeks from being drafted, were thrown against iron fittings and crushed beneath collapsing timbers. The screech of metal and the roar of fire followed. In an instant, the worst rail disaster in American history had begun. One of the trains had left Memphis the night before, carrying new recruits bound for training camps in the East before they would be shipped to the front lines in Europe. The other had departed from Chattanooga, also heavy with soldiers. Both were scheduled to pass through Nashville in the early morning hours, and both were running behind. The line that ran into the city was single track in parts, with sidings where trains could wait for each other to clear. Dispatchers knew two heavily loaded troop trains were on course to meet, but confusion, poor communication, and human error converged in the hours before dawn. At Union Station in Nashville, operators believed the Memphis train had already cleared the single-track section. The Chattanooga train, designated number 4, was given clearance to proceed. In reality, number 1, the Memphis train, was still barreling east, packed with hundreds of recruits in wooden coaches pulled by two locomotives. Neither engineer had a full picture of what lay ahead. The approach to Dutchman's Curve was blind. The track there bent sharply, running through a cut in the earth lined with trees. Visibility was no more than a few hundred feet. Both trains, each running late, were pushing their engines hard to make up time. As they entered the curve from opposite ends, whistles blew. Brakes slammed, and sparks showered from iron wheels locked against the rails. But momentum carried them forward. In seconds, 200 tons of steel and human cargo collided at a combined speed of nearly 90 miles per hour. The force of the crash telescoped the first 3 cars of each train, splintering wooden frames into kindling. Coal tenders burst, spraying burning embers across the wreckage. Steam lines ripped open, scalding anyone nearby. For the men inside, the destruction was sudden and merciless. Survivors later spoke of being hurled across aisles, pinned under beams, or dragged through shattered glass. Some never even had time to rise from their seats. The noise of the collision carried across the countryside. Within minutes, farmers and residents from the nearby community rushed toward the smoke. What they found was chaos: twisted iron, shattered wood, the screams of the injured, and fires breaking out among the wreckage. Soldiers and civilians alike clawed through debris with bare hands, pulling men from beneath piles of timber. The air was heavy with the stench of steam, oil, and blood. Rescue was hampered by the very design of the trains. Wooden coaches had splintered into jagged shards that trapped the living and the dead alike. Fires spread quickly through dry wood and spilled coal, forcing rescuers to work with speed and desperation. Some soldiers helped carry out their comrades, even as they limped with broken bones or burns. Others collapsed beside the tracks, unable to continue. Local doctors, nurses, and volunteers streamed in from Nashville, setting up makeshift aid stations along the line. For many of the gravely injured, little could be done. By late morning, the scale of the disaster was undeniable. Official counts listed at least 101 dead, though many believed the toll was higher. Most of the victims were soldiers in their teens or early 20s, men who only days before had said goodbye to families and sweethearts. In the wreckage, personal belongings were scattered everywhere: letters from home, photographs, Bibles, and scraps of uniform cloth. Entire rows of recruits had been lost in the crash before ever reaching the war they had been drafted to fight. The engineers of both trains were killed instantly, their locomotives buried nose to nose in the earth. Investigators later pieced together the sequence of events that led to the collision. Dispatchers at Union Station had misread reports, believing one train had cleared the track when it had not. Flagging procedures that might have warned the engineers were not followed rigorously. Communication between depots was slow and inconsistent. Every safeguard that should have prevented two massive trains from entering the same stretch of track failed in succession. For Nashville, the wreck was overwhelming. Morgues filled quickly, and temporary facilities were used to lay out the dead. Families crowded the city, searching for word of sons and brothers. Newspapers printed long lists of the killed and injured, their names stretching across entire pages. The wreck site itself drew crowds, some helping, others standing silently as wreckage still smoldered. Soldiers' bodies, wrapped in blankets or laid on makeshift stretchers, were carried from the wreck by their surviving comrades. The nation was stunned. At a time when casualty lists from Europe were already darkening American newspapers, the idea that more than 100 soldiers had been lost in Tennessee, not to enemy fire, but to a preventable accident, seemed unbearable. Editorials demanded accountability from the railroads, while grieving families struggled to reconcile the sacrifice their sons had made without ever leaving American soil. In the aftermath, railroads promised reforms. Greater emphasis was placed on communication protocols, scheduling, and signaling. Wooden coaches, which had splintered so lethally, came under renewed criticism, accelerating the move toward steel construction. But for those who lived through the wreck, these measures came too late. Survivors carried scars, both physical and emotional, for the rest of their lives. The Great Train Wreck of 1918 remains the deadliest rail disaster in American history. The crash at Dutchman's Curve killed more than 100 and injured many more, wiping out entire sections of two troop trains in a single instant. Today, a small marker stands near the site, a quiet reminder of the men who lost their lives before they ever reached the battlefields of France. The land is peaceful now, the tracks running smooth through the curve. But beneath that quiet is the memory of a morning when steel met steel and hundreds of young lives were cut short. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.